Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, July 1983. 900 delegates from more than 300 churches in over 100 countries, with 2,500 other participants and visitors, gather for the 6th Assembly of the World Council of Churches. For 18 days, they assembled in groups large and small, formal and informal, to reflect on the Christian affirmation of Jesus Christ, the life of the world.
Bienvenue à la 6e Assemblée du Conseil œcuménique des Églises.
Bienvenidos a la 6ª Asamblea del Consejo Mundial de Iglesias.
Wir begrüßen Sie zur 6. Vollversammlung des Ökumenischen Rates der Kirchen.
Добро пожаловать на 6-ю Ассамблею Всемирного Совета Церквей.
Welcome to the 6th Assembly of the World Council of Churches. This is the first of a two-part version of the highlights of the 6th Assembly, which met this summer here in Vancouver. For those of you who saw some of our satellite coverage, it will be an opportunity to relive those moments. For those of you who missed it, an opportunity to experience something of what it was. For those of us who were there trying to get ready, on the days of July the 22nd and 23rd, the arrival of delegates just added to the bedlam.
Which takes you from tomorrow night's dinner. Step over here, please. To the assembly, okay?
At the heart of the assembly was its worship, most of it taking place in the large yellow and white circus tent specially erected for that purpose. It began on Sunday morning, July the 24th, with a celebration of life.
Our presence here is itself a sign of the unity which God wills for all people. We have in the past committed ourselves and our churches to stay together, to grow together, and to struggle together. Let us now bear witness to our intention to live together.
And the litmus test of our love for God is our love for humanity. Some from among our number, that love has been shared at the cost of shedding their own blood and giving their own lives. We know that we live in an age when there are more Christian martyrs than in any other century of Christian history. And we remember today a member of our former Central Committee, Archbishop Luwum in Uganda. We think of Archbishop Romero in El Salvador. And I poignantly find myself, particularly today, remembering a member of our Assembly Preparation Committee, Bishop Samuel of Egypt. These all died with their clothes stained with the blood of sacrifice, blood shed in the struggle to stand alongside the poor and the oppressed, and to strive for peace and justice in a ministry of reconciliation. For in this assembly, that word of life will speak to us again, and it will change us. We shall not end this assembly the same people as those who begin it.
Assembly worship incorporated elements from many traditions and many languages. Songs and proclamation, intercessions and litanies, symbolic acts and liturgical dance made the services vivid for assembly participants and visitors. The pageantry of the welcome celebration by Canada's churches drew 15,000 people to Vancouver's Pacific Coliseum.
the crushed and suffering of the world are waiting for somebody to reveal to them that they are precious, that they are important to God, and that there is a good news, that they are not a condemned and evil people, but that there is hope. Jesus wants his church to be a church yearning for truth, the fullness of the truth and the fullness of light.
The moderator of the World Council of Churches Central Committee, Anglican Church of Canada Primate Ted Scott, opened the Assembly's business sessions with an evaluation of the WCC's work since its last assembly in Nairobi, Kenya in 1975.
We are, I believe, at the end of an era. It was an era dominated by what, for brevity, I would call urban industrial culture. This culture has come to be expressed in two major competing ideologies in our world, capitalism and communism. There are very many differences between them, but there are also some very great similarities. It is my conviction, however, that neither of these present ideological expressions of this culture are adequately responding to the challenges of our day. Both are on the defensive, and in the present struggle between them, involving power of a magnitude previously unknown in human history, there lies the possibility of the destruction not only of civilization as we know it, but also of life on this planet. I believe that both these ideologies, although they remain powerful, are no longer adequately responding to the challenges which confront us. An era is ending. I believe we are witnessing today a concerted effort on the part of the churches to break out of their cultural captivity. And I am convinced that the World Council of Churches has given great leadership in this effort. I believe, however, that the Council is often more willing to be challenged by the member churches than the churches are to be challenged by the Council. I may be wrong there, but I think that is true.
The World Council of Churches General Secretary, Philip Potter, reminded the delegates of the Council's ultimate goal of church unity.
We have since expressed the goal of unity in each place and in all places and all ages. The image of the House of Living Stones is very relevant here because it calls for an understanding of our life as churches in which the house is made up of the living stones being fitted together and functioning as a whole beyond the separateness which marks our existence. At this dangerous time in which we meet as an assembly, I hope that we who represent the House of Living Stones, coming from the diaspora that's scattered around the world in all our situations of conflict, will take a clear and unequivocal stand for God's will for peace and justice, which are inextricably bound together, and will not be tempted to echo the doomed policies of the nations from which we come. The credibility of the gospel of reconciliation is at stake here. The world will be watching us here to know whether we will meet the test of being a true house of living stones, built on the rock of faith in God, who wills peace for all, and the rights of all to be fully themselves, whatever their creed or sex or race or class or nation.
In their presentations on the Assembly theme, Professor Theodore Stylianopoulos of New York and Dr. Alan Bozak of South Africa both stressed the necessity of grounding the Assembly's deliberations firmly within the biblical foundations of the faith.
This Assembly must speak out. We must confess humbly, but without any hesitation, our faith in Jesus Christ, the life of the world. And this faith, this commitment must be the basis of our action on the issues of peace, justice, and human liberation. It is not true that this world and its people are doomed to die and be lost. But this is true. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. It is not true that we must accept inhumanity and discrimination, hunger and poverty, death and destruction. But this is true. I have come that they may have life, and that abundantly. Let us use these 2 weeks to affirm with humility and with joy and with faith and with courage Jesus Christ, the life of the world. God bless you.
To help unpack the theme, Jesus Christ, the life of the world, Assembly planners chose 4 sub-themes, each of which was explored in depth. The first focused on life as a gift of God.
For me, motherhood goes beyond childbirth and bringing them up. It brings with it a lot of responsibility, among which is to see that this life is nurtured and lived to its fullness. I have also learned that motherhood and parenthood are inseparable. This is my hope for our menfolk and for our world.
Every advance in scientific understanding brings with it new threats and new possibilities. The challenge to the churches is to become vigorously involved in this dialogue with members of the scientific community. We have an immense task before us if we are to harness the true power of science and technology to keep the world in peace, to feed the hungry, and heal the sick. That is the measure of the task.
Life confronting and overcoming death was the second sub-theme. From around the world came gripping personal testimonies to the daily reality of struggle, exploitation, insecurity, poverty, and violence.
Mine is the voice of thousands of Christians in socialist countries who, together with their fellow citizens, experienced the hell of war, the bombing and burning of cities and villages, the horrors of concentration camps, extermination, hunger, and enforced displacement. None of us wishes to repeat that experience.
It was early on Easter morning, toward the end of Matins. It is the day of the resurrection. Let us be illumined by the feast. Let us embrace one another. Let us call even those who hate us our brothers. As the choir reached this particular part of the responsive hymn that precedes the divine liturgy, the thundering of grad shells shook the building. Glimpses of the past 8 years of war must have flitted in all minds, for there was a hushed murmur in the congregation. The scorching summer heat in the shelter with only 1 gallon of drinking water for about 80 people. The sound of the approaching Israeli planes, then the shelling for hours and hours. Behold, I am making all things new. How do we proclaim this in Lebanon today, whereas that which is new has not yet dawned upon us? On that memorable Easter morning in a small old church, under the sound of exploding shells, we knew this year too that we were gathered together at that particular moment in history to greet the coming one and receive from him the spirit of life and peace.
We do not want death in peace. We want to die in freedom. We want to live as our own masters. We want justice, which will alone bring peace, true peace in the world. Peace without freedom is slavery. Peace without justice is worse than war. Are we not shouting peace, peace, peace in a loud voice, for there is no peace and no justice, no love in the world today?
Concern for the future of life itself in the face of such threats was heard again and again, and the focus was often on the children who will inherit the world that this generation leaves to them. At the assembly, the presence of children in the church, dramatically symbolized in the opening service, was a reminder of Jesus' words that of such is the kingdom of heaven.
I have a vision of peace, but what can one kid do to create peace when everywhere I look I see greed?
Mine, 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 mine!
Hunger. Competition. On your mark, get set, go!
And injustice on the playground.
Hey guys, who wants to play a game? I do! You can't play because you're too short. And you can't play because you have brown hair. You've got freckles. You're wearing braces. And you can't play because you're wearing glasses. I hate people who wear glasses. I make exceptions for myself. It's not fair when nobody's as good as I am. It's lonely at the top.
But a full and abundant life is the privilege of too few of the world's children, as delegates heard during presentations on sub-theme 3, Life in its Fullness.
I'd like her to read to you a letter from a Brazilian woman, which she dictated to a nun. She herself cannot read or write. Severina writes, "My name is Severina. I come from the northeast. Up there in my country, 2 of my babies died because I had no milk. One day in my village, I saw 42 little coffins being carried to the cemetery. My sister-in-law, who was very poor, had 17 children. 3 of them lived. All the others died before they were 4. Of the 3 who lived, 2 are not normal. I was with her for the birth, and sometimes there wasn't even a clean piece of sheet to wrap the baby in. That's what happens in a lot of families, 1,000 even.
And to me it is clear that the salvation of humanity depends on our unity. And I pray that God will give us grace to have that unity. But I have been challenged over and over again, how can you have unity with people you disagree with? Well, I said, Jesus died for it.
My country has gone through the stages and can now be classified as a dictatorship. It is within this context that I seek to understand the fullness of life. Human rights violations in my country is no secret. The beating and imprisoning of workers, the torturing of prisoners, the manipulating of the courts are well known. What is life when the oppressors have it abundantly and the little that the poor has is taken away from them? When I'm faced with these contradictions, I reassure myself by feeling that the Lord has called me to witness and would give me the power to overcome in His time.
The final sub-theme explored life in unity.
Church worships, confesses, glorifies God precisely because God speaks and reveals Himself to us. But the image which the living God reveals to us is not one of eternal solitude, but rather one of eternal communion. God is love because God is triune. The mystery of the triune God is the supreme mystery of unity and communion together.
We use these great riches of Orthodox theology in the context of our participation in the ecumenical movement and of our life and witness in a secular socialist society. This new ecclesiastical and socio-political context of life under the completely new conditions of socialist society has allowed us to gather an immensely rich experience of Christian witness.
Life in unity is still far away. More work and more bread is not being given by the rich to the poor just like that. It has to be fought for, it has to be negotiated, like the labor unions did after the Industrial Revolution in the West. Can the church play a role in this? Yes, indeed. To negotiate and build a system which guarantees work and bread for all should not be left to bureaucrats, technocrats, and diplomats.
The struggle for life in unity goes on against the backdrop of a sometimes bewildering variety of concerns and causes which compete for the attention and support of Christians. Perhaps nowhere at the Assembly was this more evident than at the Agora, an exhibit center set up on the University of British Columbia campus where community and other groups could present displays and information relevant to the Assembly theme. As the Assembly proceeded, hundreds of visitors swelled the crowds on the campus of the University of British Columbia. Besides attending portions of the official program, they were able to select from a wide variety of public programs. These forums, lectures, discussion groups, and question-and-answer sessions enabled many more to enhance their understanding of the ecumenical movement.
We have one question on microphone 1.
I'm Robert Peck from Massachusetts in the United States. There is a particularly heated discussion going on at many universities about divestment of our portfolios. And we get mixed signals from certain leaders in South Africa. And I'm wondering what your comments on the efforts for divesting our portfolios and our stocks, what you feel about that particular topic.
I always answer that question by saying that it is important for people who invest in South Africa to know that their investments are things that support one of the most vicious systems. That they should know that it is as much a moral issue to invest in South Africa as it is an economic issue. But that they must not use us as an alibi, as an excuse for taking action which they ought to take. For myself, I say that South Africa needs, or the South African government needs to have applied on it pressure, diplomatic pressure, political pressure, but above all, economic pressure. But don't come to me and ask me, what do I mean by economic pressure? That is your responsibility.
Welcome to the well. Some of you will still be eating, but we'd like to get started to give our speakers as much time as possible. Today we're addressing the topic Immigrant Women in Transition, and we have with us a number of women from the BC Task Force on Immigration.
A major breakthrough at the Assembly was the live-to-satellite television coverage, 10 hours a day, right across North America. Across the nation, ordinary people were able to participate in the Assembly's activities.
It's 8 o'clock on Canada's West Coast. From Vancouver, we bring you live via satellite today's events at the 6th Assembly of the World Council of Churches.
2 on 1. Cue Rod. Bring up Rod.
Now we continue with our Hiroshima Day coverage from the World Council of Churches 6th Assembly here in Vancouver. 3 public forums gave the entire Vancouver community a chance to learn from the experiences of Christians around the world. In the first of these, it highlighted an exchange between 2 African Christians about a question of emphasis in the mission of the church.
Good news, what does it mean? To people who are oppressed, what does it mean to people who are considered not fully human and despised and treated like dogs? What does it mean to people who must live in the homelands of South Africa, where our old people languish and die, and where our children die of hunger and malnutrition, and where people mix scraps that they beg from the neighbors of yesterday's food with shredded newspapers so that they may have something substantial in their stomachs, and they eat it to live of it and to die of it. What does it mean to say to them, the good news is that God loves you?
However, here I ask to differ with my dear brother. There are oppressed people out of whom oppression is accentuated, accelerated. Most of the poor of the world are made poor by the rich. And those rich who make poor poor are rich poor. Otherwise, they would have shared with what they have with the poor. They exploit the poor, make them poorer, and therefore, I want to say, there are oppressions which are deeper and wider than physical. I was in West Germany the other day. A lady showed me a beautiful bridge on Autobahn, and he said 17 people commit suicide on this bridge every month. And I come from Uganda, the economy is broken down, people are in camps of refugees, and yet I don't know a spot where I can say, here, hungry people commit suicide at the rate of 17 a month. There must be something in those people which food and Medicare has failed to reach. That's what I meant in my message.
And on that note, we must conclude Part 1 of our 2-part series of World Council of Churches Assembly highlights. Join us next week for Part 2. For Pressure Point, I'm Rod Booth. Good night.